You guys want to go ahead and get started or wait a little longer? Your pleasure. Well, let's why don't we go ahead and get started so that we can kind of keep on schedule. Um, and this is being taped anyway, so if anybody's dying to see what they missed, they can watch the tape. So I think we were asked, the first item on the agenda was to talk about the primary and to see if anybody had any observations about it. I checked with our election director here in Mecklenburg County today, Michael Dickerson. He said that in Mecklenburg, the early voting numbers were slightly higher than the last primary. 36% of the people voted early, compared to 34% 4 years ago and 27% the year before that. Overall turnout was lower, which is to be expected when you don't when there's no drama in the presidential race. But I didn't hear about any major glitches or anything. I talked to my friend Steve Harrison, who's a former colleague at the Observer, who works for WFAE, and he said that the delay in posting the results of the election really didn't make a difference. A lot of the counties ended up posting them about 8 o'clock anyway, so it was, it wasn't a big deal. I don't know if anybody else has heard anything about that or anything else.
I only know that the turnout was the lowest since 2004.
Wow. Yeah, primary turnout is never very high. And yet it makes all the difference in the world with most of the races, since districts are so polarized and gerrymandered. Anybody else want to say anything about the primary, or did you notice anything? Did you guys early vote? I early voted.
I stayed true to my belief. I voted on election day.
Okay.
And I did talk to a couple of Rutherford officials as well as a number of candidates in Rutherford County, and there just wasn't enough turnout to really evaluate whether there was any impact on any guidelines or rules that had changed. And skip ahead, I did have a great conversation with Corrine Duncan Noken, who was the executive director for Buncombe County, Friday before the primary. I have not had a chance to talk to her since, but I made a lot of great notes and she had some suggestions that we might talk about later on. But she said that she'd be more than happy to participate and meet with any of our committees or whomever. And as I think I mentioned before, I thought about having, talking to Rutherford County, or of course I got contacts in a lot of counties west of Mecklenburg, but I really felt like she was very professional. She's in a county it is very blue, but there's a lot of there is some competitive nature there, and she, I think, has a good perspective. And I was on the board when we hired her, and we hired her because we just trusted her, and no matter what claims are made, good, bad, or indifferent, I think she really represents the kind of executive directors that we need. And I was thrilled that she'd be willing. She has actually participated in the past with the Carter Foundation, various projects and research. So she's very familiar with who we're working with and through. So for future, whenever we want to set it up, she is very willing and would like that.
Well, Steve, you had talked about getting the election director from Rutherfordton, I think, Rutherford County. Would she substitute for him, or?
Yes. Yeah. I decided someone from a county that is overwhelmingly non-competitive, that really, I just don't think they have the broad perspective that we may want from our viewpoint. and from
Maybe
recent-
she could meet with us in a month or two.
She would love that, and she said she'd make herself available.
Great.
I just, whatever date and time, and if we want to blend with some other committees and set it up so that there could be more participation, I think she would be willing to do any of the above, individual committees, group of committees, or whatever.
I think I would throw that to Jennifer, who I think has joined us. Are you there, Jennifer?
Yes, I am here. Sorry about being late, but I warned you I might be. So, but what was the question?
Well, Steve said that the election director in Buncombe County would be willing to meet with or talk to our group or any group, right, Steve?
Yes,
About early voting or about elections, period. And Jennifer, you have a broader view of what other people are doing, so see what you
Well,
think.
it's also, yeah, no, it's helpful to get elections directors to, yeah, talk about their experience, et cetera, knowing that we have 100 different counties and probably 100 different experiences, based on size and complexity and like Steve was saying, whether it's a blue county or red county or a toss-up. But yeah, absolutely, elections director would be helpful. We are going to get an update next week from Karen Brinson Bell about how the primaries went. I know that, I think that's further on the agenda, but she, since so many of the committees want to hear if there was any issue in the primaries or anything that was a stumbling block or anything from changes in the law. She's going to be talking to us next Wednesday, I think at 11:30, and everybody should have gotten that Zoom link as well. But certainly election directors who are current, currently working Buncombe is will be a good one to have. And you can ask, it's also, Karen's going to do it for the whole election commission, so there may not be a whole lot of time for questions. So if you can get an individual election director to address the committee and just talk about some of the things that they're seeing or concerns, and you ask questions, that would probably be really good.
Jennifer, I had told people that I spoke with or I emailed with Michael Dickerson this morning about it, and he said there was really no issue with early voting in the primary. Of course, it was a lower turnout primary, so, and I saw something Steve Harrison had posted today about which I think came from Karen Brinson Bell, about problems with IDs, photo IDs with the primary. And apparently it wasn't a big problem at all. There were like 1,100 people without IDs out of 1.8 million voters. So, and apparently a lot of those got settled.
Yeah, I think there were 473 that were turned away. Maybe I'm misremembering, but the only concern there is did the election workers tell them they could have filled out an exception form? The 400 and something didn't fill out the exception form and just left without voting.
Yeah.
So yeah, but like you said, out of almost 2 million people voting, that's pretty good percentage.
Yeah, and that's not really, that doesn't really involve early voting. Some of it was probably early voting, but a lot of it was on election day too.
Right.
We were
Do
talking.
we have any sense as to whether or not there were enough workers for early voting? I've said this in all my other committees, but I'm a chief judge at a precinct, and I was woefully understaffed. Now, fortunately, it was a low turnout, but I had two high school juniors who were student assistants. And then it was just my judges and my election day special, my EDS. So if it had been a bigger turnout, I don't know how we would have done it. So did we have any sense? When I went voting early, I didn't see any issues, but I don't know if, obviously there are fewer of those sites, so maybe that was not an issue, but I'm curious if there were any staffing issues.
I think Director Bell would have a good idea about that statewide. I mean, here, my experience voting early was that there were plenty of people, but there were some counties where that might not have been the case.
I can add that, I sent her a bunch of questions that we'd like for her to cover. I will make sure that one's in there. about staffing.
We talked about reaching out, I guess, to voters, Jennifer, or with a poll. I mean, did we get any questions about early voting in that poll?
So we're waiting to hear back from Michael Bitzer, who passed our questions on to Elon Meredith, the other two that I always forget. And they're some of them are not putting the surveys in the field until early April. So they may not get results until I think some of the polls are in the field now, but I have not heard an update from Michael. I'll touch base with him and see where that stands. I don't know, Rachel, have you heard anything? Is Rachel on?
No, I have not heard anything. I think we're kind of just all in the same place where we're waiting to hear the results.
Yep. So yeah, so
Go ahead.
so one of the questions for each of the committees now is, are there other ways that you want to capture public feedback, you know, apart from those polls that are going to go out? You know, is there any kind of thing that the committee wants to do on its own? When we do have we have something on the website for people to give input, but it's not, you know, it's targeted. So I don't know if the committee wants to do any kind of, you know, survey or anything to find out more. I know we have limited capacity and resources to do something on your own, but it's just worth discussing.
Competitor Nikola claimed to be the only one really making heavy duty commercial fuel cell electric vehicles, but Hyzon was like, not true.
Anybody have any ideas about that?
Hyzon is smaller, the company just delivered those.
I'm just intrigued to see our full questionnaire and see what kind of responses we get to those selected questions. And then from my perspective, I would really like Maureen from Buncombe County to, with a little notice, to come and give us her perspective of what's going on. I called it, if she could wave her magic wand, what kind of suggestions and recommendations might she make? And now I think would be appropriate, because we've kind of gone through the primary. I don't really expect there to be a tremendous backbreaking turnout for the runoff. So I think the timing would be good for that. And I'd rather her speak for herself, although she and I had a great, like 2.5 hour meeting where she just opened up and shared a lot of perspectives with me about the functions, you know, early voting, timeframes, weekend voting. She had some ideas on observers versus partisan workers, and potentially ethics committee that could help recruit and fill out the workforce and limit the amount of partisanship. She did have some concerns about the 30-day director rehire or hire rule, where if a board has not hired a new director, if there's a vacancy, that it would then kick to the legislature. I didn't realize that. I don't even think you can do that under state employment laws. I think by the time you advertise, your 30 days would be up and you wouldn't have time to even interview. So she had a lot of interesting perspectives about the entire process. And so I'd like to find a time and date for her to just come and make a presentation. And the two committees that I'm on that I think would be most beneficial are like, I guess this committee, early voting, and the mail-in ballot. She had a lot of good thoughts on both of those. Counting votes is another committee I'm on. I never had a concern about, you know, based on what I saw, if there were 10 votes cast and all of them were legitimate, they all got counted. My questions have always been on how things were collected during early voting or mail-in voting.
what did
I
she
think it
say?
should be excellent.
What did she say about early voting? Because I think if she spoke to us, we'd want to focus on that.
Yeah, on her early voting, she thought weekends and Saturdays, she would absolutely want all early voting to end on Saturday. They need the time of Sunday, Monday to get prepared for Tuesday. She felt like if it she didn't see that there would be any problem including a Sunday, but she would want to do it like Wednesday, Thursday before the weekend before, but it would end on Saturday at like 3 o'clock currently. So she was pretty flexible. She didn't really have an opinion about whether she didn't want to see it to be longer, but shorter as long as it really included a consistent number of hours and days, and didn't see a problem with including at least one Sunday in that mix.
Yeah,
I'm
right
trying
now it
to,
ends on Saturday before the election anyway, so.
yeah. Well, she felt like that. That was just, clearly said that one day voting was too hard, but, 8 to 10 days so that you would have that weekend, a full weekend in advance of the end of early voting would be really a good thing.
So she's thinking it should be shorter than 17 days?
No, she thought that was about right, but she
Okay.
did not want it. She did not want it to go longer. The issues of expense and cost, number of early voting sites, some of those were still considerations. She'd like to see more consistency and state funding to make sure that counties are not choosing between early voting sites and their budget. If they have, some county commissioners may not be as generous as others, and then it adversely affects their ability to maybe have sites amply around the community for early voting.
Maybe,
Or-
maybe Karen Brinson Bell can tell us whether, how much disparity is between large counties and small counties in terms of early voting sites, and if they're based on a per capita kind of formula or no formula, which I think is probably true, but that would be
Yeah, that's
interesting to
a
me.
that's a good question. I'll make sure that I add that. I can't look at my computer right now because I'm in the car, but I will see what I sent to her and make sure I add disparities in funding and early voting and whether there's a standard. Because it would make sense to have a standard of, one early voting site per, I don't know, 20,000 people, whatever.
Yeah, and poorer counties shouldn't be penalized, I don't think, by having fewer voting sites.
Right.
What
Well,
else?
I just think there's some geography that has to be played in. You could go to some of the counties in the western part of the state. You go to Murphy, or Cherokee County. I could see you have one in Murphy, but you really need one up in Andrews, because the terrain and access to those,
Right,
the mileage isn't all that great, but the curvy roads can turn what you would think would be a 15-minute trip could easily be 30 to 40 minutes to an hour just to get in. And a small county like that only has one site. Then you go to, other counties that are as, Robbinsville or Graham County, I think it's unfair for them to, have just one site in Robbinsville, as much as I think it's what they're even doing. Once you go out in some of the other areas, you get pretty remote, but yet there are pockets of population out there that I think it's difficult to go in and vote because they're having to drive a long way to do it, especially older voters.
Sounds like you know our state well, Stephen.
Well, as Jim knows, I kind of stepped in and got a little bit of my education there in Mecklenburg, grew up in Gaston, and then I ended up in Western North Carolina, and I've been out here for a long time. A lot of them think I'm local.
what else is on people's minds about early voting or what we should be doing? Are we supposed to contribute to some report in June, Jennifer?
Yes, and we've sent the template for the report around to the committees. It's also on the shared drive. It's a pretty basic form. It's basically, you know, what meetings did you have? What issues did you choose to focus on? You attach any research that you know, looked at that's, you know, national best practices or other states or whatever. And then basically report on, you know, what does North Carolina do that works great? And are there any areas for improvement? So how do we do it now? And what would, you know, is there anything that we'd like to change or consider? So that's, yeah, we're supposed to be working toward a draft of that by the end of June.
I think Leslie has done a good thing on kind of best practices, right, Leslie? Didn't you look at other states and
Yeah, well, I had that spreadsheet that showed
Yeah.
the length and that sort of thing.
yeah, that was good. That'll be part of it. And whatever
Yeah.
input we get from the elections director, I guess in Buncombe County or any other county would be good.
Well, and also there've been some national surveys about people using early voting and whether people like early voting. And I can't remember if there's one in the drive or the shared drive or not, but basically what they show is that both that all ideologies like early voting, that it's one of those things that, you know, for convenience and access, people can agree on. And the main areas of disagreement are things like how many sites, how many days, you know, that kind of thing. So
Calendar, Easter is 9 days away, and as people rush to buy chocolate bunnies and chocolate eggs for their Easter baskets, they're discovering a bitter truth. The
somebody
same
have the radio on?
Valentine's Day. According to the retail meeting.
I can. Hold, it might be me. I do have a television on, but it's kind of distant. I'd be surprised if you can hear it. But let me just make sure that doesn't work.
Okay, we were hearing something about Easter bunnies,
Chocolate. Yeah, you're making me hungry.
chocolate.
Well,
No, there wasn't any Easter bunnies on here.
anybody have any other questions or anything we should talk about, Jennifer, or anybody?
Well, the question, I guess the question still to answer is, do you want to try to figure out any other way besides talking to an election director, hearing, you know, anecdotal, whatever, seeing the polling? Do you want to have any other way of surveying people in North Carolina or talking to people about early voting? And it may be, you know, you think that that's enough, and that's fine. It's just a question to answer.
Personally, I don't think I really see the need for it. I mean, I think early voting is popular, and I think the numbers sort of speak for that. I
Yep.
mean, I don't know what people would say other than they like it, they don't, you know, it should be longer, should be shorter. And maybe that's what we want, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
I
No,
think I think that the consensus is across the board is that the early voting is here to stay and it is well liked. I think there can always be questions about the length of it, and I don't know that those questions will ever go away. You know, I would want to insert a paragraph that as long as it includes at least one full weekend in the week prior to the election, I would concede that that would be a minimum that should be applied, and possibly go ahead and include a full Saturday and Sunday, a full week prior to the weekend before the election. I think would be a minimum. And I would suggest that based on everything that, we go much longer than that. I don't know if there's any justification that it's gonna adversely or positively affect the turnout of the election to go more than 10 to 17 days. But I do think it would dramatically impact the cost of an early election. And so I think some reasonable measure on the time frame would be sufficient.
I also, sorry, Eda.
No,
Still
no,
going?
I'm,
Okay.
yeah,
sorry.
I was just stumbling along.
I also recall, I think in an earlier meeting, we talked about whether or not there was the possibility to see demographically how it's used. And I can't recall if we figured out if that's possible, right? Is it younger folks? Is it rural folks? Is it urban folks? Is it even if we can look at racial demographics? I think there's something that would be valuable for us to look at to say, these are the folks that are accessing this more. And then we can make the case that those are populations that we want more engaged, right? Rural folks and others who would have more capacity, thinking about the transportation challenges that we talked about earlier. So anyway, I don't know if that's possible, but it'd be great if we could have some recommendations or at least highlight that in our report, right? That this seems to be really a great tool to get more younger voters engaged or something along those lines.
I think that's a great idea. I think Michael Bitzer and Chris Cooper are experts at slicing and dicing, the votes. They come out with they do their blog, Old North State Politics, and I think they could probably decipher who votes early. Men, women, minorities, whatever. So I can ask them.
And I think that'd be really great. And I think it's important for people to see, if we see that there's a trend, that it is working even more for some populations.
Yeah.
That'll be good backup information too for whatever we end up, recommending. So sounds good.
Okay. Unless there's anything else, I think we've kind of hit the high points.
So make sure you try to either tune in or listen to the recording of Karen Brinson Bell next week. And you're right, she'll be talking about voting in general, not just early voting. But it'd be interesting to hear what she has to say about the primary. And yeah, Jim, if you could follow up with Chris and Michael about
I will.
that, and I'll see if I can get a question into her about staffing. And she may be talking about staffing in general, not just early voting, but early voting certainly increases the number of staff, the numbers that are needed to cover the polls. So we'll make sure we ask her about that. But sounds good. They just got to figure out who's going to write the report.
Well, there's
Maybe
one
we'll draw it.
writer among us, and he should write it, Jim.
Maybe we could draw straws. Anyway, well, unless there's anything else, thank everybody for joining, and I guess we have another meeting set that Rachel will remind us of in a month. So, great.
Yep, that's it. And Steve, you're going to try to get the election director to come to that meeting in April?
If y'all would like, I just, we could try
Yeah.
to set it up by Zoom,
Yeah,
where she
yeah.
could be there in Asheville, and join us.
Yeah.
I just I don't have my, Rachel's having to keep me regularly posted on when my next meeting is. I seem to be remiss in knowing that, but if y'all will just, Jim, I'd like to meet with you if I could. I'll come down from Rutherford and spend time with my dad in Belmont, but I'd like to just talk to you about some stuff that goes all the way back to Sue Myrick days, and And
Where we
then,
met.
but that's right. And if you'll give me a definite time and date, I'll see what I can do to get Corrine signed up for it.
Okay,
Yeah, the April date, Rachel, you may be able to even tell right now when our meeting is in April.
It's April 26th.
Okay. So, yeah, Steven, so ask her for April 26th, 3 o'clock.
3 p.m. Okay. Got it.
Super.
okay, just wrote that down. Thank you, guys, and we'll see you back then. And Steve, shoot me an email or something. We'll work something out.
Okay. I'll do it right now.
Thank you, man. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you all. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.